Hey everyone, welcome to episode 3 of Beyond the Surface. Just want to say to everyone, thank you very much for listening, and to those people that reached out after listening to episode 2. The response has been absolutely incredible. I'd love hearing your stories, answering your questions, and connecting with you. I've had quite a few people sliding into my DMs and telling me they've had similar experiences, or they've had experiences where they've had anxiety after an incident or accident offshore, and in many cases they didn't seek any help or they didn't look for help. So a big message for me to anyone that is having any sort of issues is there is help out there. There are people who have been through similar experiences who are out there, and they're willing to listen and willing to help. So use them as a resource. This episode's topic is a question that I think I get asked more than any other, and that is, how much do commercial divers make? And I obviously get why people ask. The problem, I think, is there are wild numbers everywhere. There are stories about 6 figures and, oh, you're a diver, you must be rich. And the numbers that are being bandied about sound amazing if you're on 25 grand a year and hating your job. But most of the info is outdated, exaggerated, and missing context. Because someone will say, what do you earn per day? And you tell them, and then they do a quick mental calculation and they multiply it by 365 days in a year, and they say that, well, you must be earning an absolute king's ransom. There are divers that do earn a king's ransom, and there are divers that earn a pauper's pittance. And so what I'm doing in this episode is I'm going to give you an honest breakdown. I'll give you the actual day rates for different experience levels, what the general diving rotations mean for annual income, and we can discuss critical things as well. So the scope of this podcast today will be what I know best, which is the UK and North Sea. I'll also mention briefly the Middle East, Asia, and different structures there. And I will give accurate numbers and not vague generalities. So by the end, you'll know what to realistically expect, what's your actual take home after deductions, and is the money worth the lifestyle, which is probably the number one question everyone wants to know. So the reality is that the money can be really good. And as I said, it's not as simple as high day rate equals rich. There's a lot more to it. So if you're interested, have a listen and I'll break it down for you. So really to set the scene, there are 2 different worlds in diving, or 2 different main worlds in the type of diving we're speaking about. You've got inshore, which will be ports, harbours, fish farms, civil engineering, that sort of thing. And then you've got offshore, which will be oil and gas, and you've got wind farms and vessel diving from vessels. So they have completely different pay scales for each of these different disciplines or different areas you're going to be working in. So as an inshore diver in UK, you're going to be looking at about £250 to £300 per day. You can work for most of the year. You can be home some of the nights if you're working near home. And there's generally no rotational perks. Some people will work full-time for diving companies. I know of one lad that's just come out of the army. He's been offered 50 grand to work full-time, which is a pretty good starting wage, as he's just come out of the army. He was a diver in the army, but as a new civils diver, that's pretty decent. And that would be pretty standard for the inshore side of things. So the next tier up from that would be offshore air diving. Air diving is where you go from the vessel, you go into the water, and you come back to the vessel, as opposed to saturation diving, where you leave from the vessel, you go down in a closed bell, you do your diving, you go back into the closed bell, back up to the boat, but you don't come back into fresh air, you go into a decompression chamber. So for offshore air diving in the North Sea, the base rate for a diver is about £660 per day. There's a difference, 2 different rates. There's what's called a diver and what's called a professional air diver. The diver is someone that's probably new to the business or new to offshore and hasn't met the criteria to make it as what's classed as a professional diver. So they're basically a trainee, but it's not called trainee. As I said, they're on £660-ish a day. And as a professional air diver, they'll be getting £680 a day. So basically, to go from air diver to professional air diver offshore, you need to have 100 surface dives, 100 hours of bottom time, and you need at least 70 of those dives and 70 of those hours from a DP vessel, so from a DSV, a dive support vessel. And you have to complete a minimum of 4 tool competencies. Tool competencies would be things like using HP high pressure water jetting equipment, using hydraulic tools, using grip blasting equipment, lift bags, and dredging equipment, that sort of stuff. Your next tier up from air diving would be offshore saturation diving. That's where you live in a chamber for usually up to a month at a time. The base rates are similar to air, so a mixed gas diver will be earning a base rate of £665 a day, and a professional mixed gas diver will be earning £680 a day. So to qualify as a professional bell diver, from just being a bell diver, in the North Sea you have to have your 100 surface supplied dives, you have to have 100 closed bell lockouts. What that means is you have to leave the diving bell and go and do your dive, and you have to have 400 lockout hours, so you have to be out of the bell for 400 hours, obviously in one go. And you need 70 dives and 70 hours offshore from a dynamically positioned vessel, and you need a minimum of those tool competencies I spoke about before. Okay, so that doesn't sound so great. You're locked in a steel tube for a month at a time and you're getting the same rate as an air diver. But that's where it gets interesting, because while you're in saturation, you get a £50 per hour bonus. And so if you work out for 24 hours at £50, that's £1,200 a day on top of your base rate. So the saturation divers in the North Sea are earning around £2,000 per day in sat. The Middle East is a completely different kettle of fish. I've seen jobs advertised out there looking for experienced divers where they only want to pay you $150 a day. And I know expat divers won't go out and work for that, but I know some local divers unfortunately work for that type of money. But usually an expat diver in the Middle East will be earning between $250 to $350 a day. An experienced diver might go up, lead diver might go up to $400 a day if they have their inspection tickets and their diver medic tickets. And a supervisor will probably be on about $500 to $600 a day out there. I'm not sure about the rates in the Gulf because I haven't worked out there. So if anyone is listening and has those rates, so they could send them to me, I can update you all on that. Australia region, there's similar pay structure to the UK. So the reality of that, the brutal truth is, people see that you earn £680 a day and they'll do a quick mental calculation and multiply that by 365. But that's not really how it works. So the reality is, Inshore, a full-time employee will be getting about 50k a year. They get regular hours, they get benefits, they get a pension. That's steady work and predictable income. If you're freelance inshore, if you hustle, you'll probably get 7 to 8 months work a year. So that's maybe 140 to 160 days, about 250 to 300 quid a day. So that's like 35 to 40k before tax. And if you don't work, obviously you don't get paid. Offshore air diving, well, the hard truth is, if you're really lucky, you get 5 months work a year, because obviously the North Sea is seasonal and there's not much air work during the winter because the weather is so bad, and 5 months is about 150 days. So at 665 to 680 pounds a day times 150 days, you're looking at around 100k before tax. But the reality of that is there's lots of sitting at home and waiting for calls. Now, sat diving, which everyone puts up there on a pedestal as the place you want to be, is, if you get that contract, you're probably looking at 4 full sats a year. So that's 4 rotations of 28 days as a minimum. And so if you're doing 4 28 days multiplied by £2,000 a day, you're looking at about 224 grand before tax. But getting regular sat work is pretty difficult. It's not unattainable, but as I said, it's pretty difficult. So it really is a waiting game. What nobody's going to tell you is that jobs get cancelled at the last minute all the time. You'll say no to one job because you're going on this really good job that's coming up, and then that gets cancelled and you've shit canned the last job, so you don't get on that. If there's weather delays, you might not work because of that. Between contracts, you don't get any income, and you're pretty much living on the last job's money. So as a quick recap, your yearly income: inshore 35 to 50k depending on your employment type, offshore 60 to 100k if you get your 5 months, sat diving 200k plus if you get regular work. So let's do a bit of a reality check here. So let's compare some shore-based jobs. So as an inshore diver, your 34 grand take-home pay is probably going to be about the same as a teacher or a nurse. However, you're away from home for 6 months. It's cold, wet, and dangerous work. And if you're going to stay as an inshore diver, that is your career progression pretty much stopped. Or you can become a diving supervisor inshore, but you're not going to earn a great deal more as a supervisor than as an inshore diver. So as an offshore diver with your 66k take-home pay, good money, no question. But again, you miss half your life. You're going to miss birthdays, you're going to miss anniversaries, you're going to miss weekends, you're going to miss weddings, and it is hard on relationships. You're leaving your family behind, you're leaving your wife behind. She has to deal with the family when you're not there. So there's that. As a sat diver on 127k take home, genuinely good money, but you're in a tube for weeks at a time. You're breathing helium, and it can take a physical toll. Also, if you injure yourself, it's going to take time to decompress you. So if you're in sat, and say you're doing a deep sat, it might take 5 days to decompress you. There's no way they can get you out that system quicker, because they have to release the pressure extremely slowly to release all the gas that is saturated in your body. That's why they call it saturation diving. It's actually quicker to bring people back from space than it is from the depths of the ocean. So if I chop my leg off, or I crush my leg, or I crush my arm, or I have an accident and I need to go to hospital, see a specialist, it's still going to take that amount of time to get me out the system. If one of my children has an accident, or somebody in my family dies, or they need me there by their bedside, it's still going to take that amount of time to get me out of the system, and then I've got to get back home after that. So that can be extremely hard as well. So if we compare, like shore-based comparison, a project manager onshore might earn 60 to 80k salary. They're home every night, they've got a pension, they've got sick pay, they've got holiday pay, there's a career ladder, there's promotions, and you can have a pretty normal life. And so really, a lot of guys, I think, get caught in the golden handcuffs of working offshore. So you get used to the money, the lifestyle, inflation kicks in, you've got a nice house, a nice car, you've got your holidays, and then you can't leave because normal jobs pay 30 to 40k, and you feel trapped by your own success. I know a lot of guys do. I've seen guys in their 40s who begin to hate diving, marriages are struggling, but they can't afford to quit because they need 100k to maintain their lifestyle, and they're just not going to get that outside of diving very easily. So I guess the real question isn't, can I make good money diving? It's, is this money worth what I'm giving up? And so that's something that needs to be seriously weighed up if you're considering a career or embarking on a career in diving. So, is the money worth it? The honest answer is, it depends on you. The money is good if you've got no commitments and you're young, if you love adventure, if you thrive on that type of lifestyle. The money isn't enough if you want a normal family life, if you want routine and stability, if your body can't handle the work, and if you're only doing it for the money. So my advice would be, don't chase a day rate, chase the right fit for your life. A 45k job that you enjoy beats a 100k job that you hate. Trust me, I've seen both. Beyond the salary, you need to consider your relationship status, your health and fitness, your long-term goals, and actually what you want from life. So being a diver can be absolutely amazing. But you really need to weigh up those pros and cons, in my opinion.
Now, I know this episode was heavy on the numbers and taxes, and it's not the most exciting stuff, but you need to hear the truth about money. The next episode is completely different. We're talking about the runs ashore, the wild nights out, and the stories the dive schools won't tell you. Like the time I woke up to a cabin covered in blood, and I had to tell the diver that there was no way, even though I was a diver medic, that I would be able to stitch up his knee. Or the night in Trinidad where 2 locals convinced me and my mate, the deck foreman, to get into their cars and tour around the port of Spain at 3 o'clock in the morning to the parts that you didn't want to go to. We genuinely thought we were about to be robbed or killed. The stories are entertaining, but they also taught me lessons that shaped my entire career. So episode 4 will be the runs ashore, the good, the bad, and the how the hell did we survive that. Looking forward to seeing you there.